I'm Deborah HIckling Gordon. 101 not out. With the ups and downs of West Indian cricket these days, such a sustained showing is super significant. And I say not out for Louise Bennett Coverley because her voice is as significant today as it was when it could be heard regularly on radio and television, in theatres and in hamlets across Jamaica. Miss Lou was omnipresent. She's a folk heroine, and Jamaicans love us a folk heroine. There have been scores of them in our history. Whether or not our folk heroines or heroes are named hero or heroine on the books and receive an insignia, they remain in the hearts of the Jamaican people because of their deeds and what their legacies meant and continue to mean in the forming of the Jamaican persona. For me, Jamaican folk heroes or heroines are those men and women who speak up on our behalf. They are the folk within our society who come to our defense as Jamaicans and say the things to principalities and powers in the ways that we wish we could. Louise Bennett certainly did. Their words and stance are memorable and retainable, spoken in our language. They made enormous dents in the consciousness of our people. One major element of folk heroism was that everyone, like Louise Bennett, used elements of Jamaican culture. Our language, our music, our theatre, our dress to communicate our worth back to us, and we believed them. Our folk heroes are fearless, bold, and have the courage of their convictions, not for themselves, but on behalf of everyday Jamaicans. They are people out of our contemporary history, chosen by the people, not the system. And even those that are more notorious than pious, including a range of police officers known as protectors of the people, but whose methods have come to be questioned with good reason, are considered folk heroes. But as folk heroines go, Louise Bennett stood out as premier. Our Miss Lou was a heroine among folk heroines. Understanding this in present day is important because our generation continues to seek out voices to stand in our defense. It's also important because the generation that follows us has access to so many more voices on so many more platforms that it's important to create circumstances that help to filter and balance those often external influences. Miss Lou, in life and in death, provided one way to bridge that growing gap as she remains in the Jamaican consciousness across generations. Go to any festival, speech competition, or school concert, and there she is. Her influence is big and broad, permeating the lives of Jamaican men and women from the 1930s when she began to write, publish, and perform, through to the 21st century when we still live within the reach of Miss Lou's voice. And for me, history is as important as the present. You see, we have so much history to share. Those of us who are privileged enough to share it must do so responsibly. Miss Lou knew that. She understood it. She knew that there is as much bias and division as there are messages of hope to tell in our history. And that's why in the process of telling our story, she was selfless, focused on development, understanding, and upliftment. So let's talk a little history and where and why we need to get to know more about Miss Lou, the woman. I always say that the history of a country's cultural industries and cultural economy is as important as the sector itself in present day. We can't understand why our cultural and creative practitioners behave as they do now without understanding how the creative sectors came to be. We need to understand the lives and struggles of some of our main cultural and creative players over time. For example, we say that one of the major issues that our cultural and creative industries face is mistrust. To solve that problem, we have to ask ourselves why. Where did that mistrust and second guessing come from? We have to look back to those who have been fighting principalities and powers on our behalf, like Miss Lou, for those answers. She might argue that mistrust is ingrained in our very being. For example, she asks, how can we trust ourselves if you can't sing Linstead Market and water come on me eye? You have to tap sing all lang syne and coming through the ride. Miss Lou might have been asking, how can we engender trust when we don't trust ourselves and what we bring to the table? How can we trust ourselves when we have greater pride in that which comes from outside than what is our own? How can we engender trust where class, race, and economics remain at the center of inequalities that we see and face every day from before she was even born? Many of those answers to our questions lie in the histories of people like Miss Lou, beyond what she wrote, beyond what she performed or produced, but what she lived. Follow me. Earlier this year, I had to do some research into the life of Miss Lou's dear friend, actress and musician, Louise Kelly Barrow, on the occasion of her death, Louise Kelly Barrow Miller. The stories of their lives between the 1920s and present day explain so many of the contradictions in our country. Picture it with me. I love to visualize these times, and my greatest wish as a filmmaker is to recreate stories like that of Miss Lou and Miss Louise true to the era. But I digress. Both women were born in the period between emancipation and independence. The history we learn tells us about the ghastly conditions that existed for the majority of Jamaicans. Poverty was rife, unemployment was a way of life, exploitation and inequity were almost accepted as so by the majority of Jamaicans. Enslavement and apprenticeship were not a far memory, just 2 generations behind. Truth is, even today for many in the Caribbean, these themes remain realities in the conditions of everyday life. Decolonization, which is ridding ourselves of colonial rule and mindset, was the sentiment at the basis of these struggles. Within that picture, there was a group of Jamaican men and women, like Louise's and Lois's parents, and many of our great grand and grandparents. They were intent on making new lives for their families and themselves. We need to know more about this cadre of Black Jamaicans and their efforts. Louise's parents were among them. So Miss Lou's story began like many Jamaican stories, in a modest home. She was born in Spanish Town in 2019 and lived with her mother. Her memories of childhood would have included the World Wars and the 1930s Caribbean-wide labor agitation. Her parents were entrepreneurs, a baker and a dressmaker, eking out an independent existence within a colonial reality. This was the black middle class of early 20th century Jamaica. It's a wide band from traders and tradesmen and women to educated men and women, owners of businesses, civil servants and professionals. Well, if the working class was the backbone and the limbs of Jamaican society, this group of men, women and their families might well have been the organs. Theirs are the stories of Jamaican resilience that Louise knew, saw and respected. She received her education at institutions including Calabar and Excelsior that were designed to ensure that Black Jamaican children from modest families had opportunities for education. Her account in New Scholar, which Dahlia has asked me to share later, speaks about the anxieties and ambivalence associated with education in those times. She speaks of the phenomenon of the bad behaving picnic, another misunderstood phenomenon that continues to exist in our education system today. She would have gained awareness through the media, which played a significant role in reporting at the time. Newspaper entries in the Daily Telegraph carrying the colonial line, while the Daily Herald described with great emotional effect the circumstances within the colonized majority of the Jamaican people. By 1943, she was contributing poetry to the Sunday Gleaner. From the circumstances of colonial life, Louise Bennett was telling stories about the people she saw around her, the traditions she encountered, and the characters she met. Then she went to England to study in 1945, having received a scholarship from the British Council to attend the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. It's another set of stories we need to be telling, the stories of those Jamaicans who were educated in times of empire. Lois Kelly Miller and my grandmother were amongst the scores of Jamaican sons and daughters whose worldview was formed and insights influenced by life as black men and women living and being educated in the United Kingdom. Louise spoke of the Oxford book, the English verse, Chaucer, Burns, and Lady Grizzle, characters that must have emerged in her colonial curriculum. But she inverted the focus from the imperial education in her poem, Banza Killing, asking a question that is at the center of her work. Why is it that as Jamaicans, we give more emphasis to those characters, those stories, that language than our own? It's a question we must continue to ask ourselves today. Here we are, struggling to give culture and the natural enterprises that emerge from it the respect, regard, and support that it requires, so that it can be central to shaping our economic project and our social realities and reform. Originality, we say, but Louise Bennett said it first. Louise Bennett's life upon her return home was multifaceted, much like the conceptualizer of this tribute, Dahlia Harris. She was involved in social development, advocacy, and outreach as part of the Norman Manley-led team that established the Community Development Movement. That eventually became known as Jamaica Welfare Ltd. Well, the story of that is that Norman Manley, Jamaica's premier and chief architect of the independence movement, had assembled a team of progressive thinkers, Tom Gervin, Reverend Edward Burke, and Louise Bennett, to interface with Jamaica's black masses in order to reduce social problems, including the rural-urban drift. In those re-engineering efforts, Manley sought to get the cash-rich United Fruit Company to give a penny for every bunch of bananas it bought towards rural development. That's what we call public-private partnership today. The fund, called Jamaica Welfare, was used to promote service cooperatives, set up a literacy program, start self-help housing, and many a process of building national pride and cultural identity. Are we seeing the lessons? As a part of this project, Louise Bennett traveled Jamaica's hills and vales. She taught, she empowered, she bolstered spirits. She reminded Jamaican people of the greatness within who they are. The salt of the earth characters she told stories became her stories. Miss Mary and our dry foot boy, Nana and our kitchen, and everywhere a Mass Charlie. Mass Charlie. She successfully used that which existed within them to strengthen the people she met. There are so many lessons from those times we need to learn. Theatre became her life. The media became her life. Many of those stories you'll hear today. So, for me, it was her advocacy that moves me most. Louise Bennett's fearlessness, her eagerness to speak about matters concerning her people when it was largely unpopular, and in an environment where the institutions of society stood against the things she stood for. This was a woman who had become the conscience of Jamaican people. Her subsequent move to Canada was as political as her advocacy. Another set of stories that must one day be told in context. We have barely touched the surface, but now my appetite is whet. Dahlia, we must make those films and plays in her honor. And today is as good a day as any to start. All when we feel discouraged, ambivalent, and nervous, like Miss Lou's new scholar and his mother, a poem Dahlia asked me to share with you today. And you have to do it right. New Scholar by Louise Bennett. Good morning, teacher. How is you? My name is Sarah Pooh. This is for my little boy, Michael, and me just bring him to school. Him born one rainy days, ma'am. It was coming on tonight. Ugly baby throat grow pretty for true, for this one was a sight. Him born the week when Rufus jackfruit tree did start to bear. Is that same month Obi pig dead, but I forgot the year. Me call him Mike, Mikey, Jakey, Jacob, Jack. But him right name is Michael Jacob Alexander Black. Not treat him rough, your teacher. Him is a sickly child. As you touch him hard, him make nice. Some people say him spoil. Take time with him, your teacher. If him rude and start to rave, is beat up. Take time with him, your teacher. If him rude and start to rave, this beat another boy and him will frighten and behave. For enough time when he rude a yard and won't hear me at all, I just beat the bedpost hard, ma. And you want to hear Jack Ball. Now that you know in little ways and not having no fear that anything we tell him, so I left him in your care. Aye. Thanks, Dahlia, for this opportunity. It's been my absolute pleasure.